Joining me right now in a First on Fox Business interview, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Senator Paul, good to see you, sir. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Why did you change your mind?
Well, I think we've been at war for too long in too many places, and I think the president tends to agree with me, but I want him to be surrounded by advisors who also agree with the president. The president said very clearly the Iraq war was a mistake. I think the Iraq war is probably the most instructive foreign policy disaster of the last couple of decades, and we should learn from it. And I kept asking Director Pompeo, was the Iraq war a mistake? Do you agree with the president? And I wasn't getting a good answer. But finally, over the last few days, I got a more succinct answer from both the president and from Director Pompeo, and a promise that he will be very public with saying that he does agree with the president's vision of the world. I think that, combined with the fact that the president now has opened the door to negotiations with North Korea and that Pompeo is part of that, all of that figured into it.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading your tweets yesterday, I guess after you had a meeting with the president, and you said that based on your conversation, you believed that Secretary Pompeo agreed with the president that, in fact, less entanglements is better than more entanglements.
I think that's a good way to put it in general. We're probably not all in exactly the same place. I'm ready to leave Afghanistan yesterday. I wouldn't send one more soldier there. I don't think they're exactly there, but I think even Pompeo in his written questions admitted there is no military solution to Afghanistan. And my point is, if there is no military solution, why would you send one more young man or woman over there to risk their life?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, but then there's Syria, and the president recently said, look, we're going to be taking our men and women home from Syria relatively soon, and that created a lot of upset because even people like General Jack Keane, four-star general, says, look, if you pull out of Syria right now, you're going to have a vacuum just the way we pulled out of Iraq, and ISIS will get stronger. Do you disagree with that, sir?
Absolutely disagree with it. This is the answer of all the neocons. They want to stay everywhere, and they predict profound, disaster if we ever leave. But that's a sort of response that has us staying everywhere all of the time. So no, I think Syria should be. I think one of the ideas that's been floated is having more local countries participate in it. The people who live there ought to be manning the armies. We live thousands of miles away. We shouldn't have to occupy and keep the peace in every country.
So fair enough, but do you agree that when President Obama pulled out of Iraq, it created a vacuum and created ISIS?
No, I would say that when we attacked Saddam Hussein and toppled him, we created a vacuum and a crisis and chaos there, and it's persisted to this day. When you look at ISIS and where ISIS actually arose, ISIS arose in the civil war of Syria, not in Iraq.
So, Senator, did the president make any promises to you as far as pulling out of Syria?
I think we talked more in general terms, and I don't think it's really appropriate to try to pin him down on, hey, we have to leave by next week or I'm not voting for him. But I heard loud and clear from the president, and I tell you loud and clear and with very specific language that he's very much in my, with me on a lot of the ideas that we've been at war too long in too many places. And I think people are going to be surprised over the next year or two that I think there will be some ending of some of the wars around the world.
Well, one of the issues, of course, with that omnibus bill recently was the fact that this is a $1.3 trillion omnibus bill, but the fact that the GOP wanted to protect the military. And that's why we ended up spending all of that money, which, of course, was really an issue for a lot of conservatives. You included,
Yeah, I think it's probably the opposite, though. I think if you spend yourself into a $22 trillion debt, you actually make your country weaker. So I disagree with those people who say, oh, we got to expand, we got to give a blank check to the military. I think it's actually making us weaker as we go further and further into debt. So I think our national security is best protected by not having our mission too large. I think our mission is too large. We're in too many countries. We don't have enough money left over to upgrade our nuclear arsenal, upgrade our missile defenses, and to actually pay our troops better. So I would do all of those things, but I would do it and pay for it by actually not being in Afghanistan and spending $50 billion a year in Afghanistan.
So do you think that we should have just allowed the government to close down then for this omnibus? Because House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy was in the studio here yesterday, and he takes aim at your chamber for the massive amount of spending. Listen to this, sir.
The whole reason why you even got into an Omni, the House did all the work. We passed all 12 of our appropriation bills. The challenge was the minority in the Senate not voting against an appropriation bill, but voting against to even allow it to come up to be debated.
Senator, your reaction?
Some true and some untrue. We actually, I don't think, ever filibustered an appropriation bill in the last year. We didn't bring them up, so the Senate did not do its job. The appropriation bills were not brought forward in a timely fashion, one at a time, but I don't believe there was ever a filibuster or a vote against hearing them. As much as I'm against the spending, I typically will vote not to filibuster spending bills and to actually hear the spending bills. So true and not so true what he said. But I do think that the point is that we're spending too much money, and what the leadership in the House are bragging about that they put forward was a disaster to conservatives because it was a gross overspending of money and spending of money. We're actually going to have $1 trillion deficit this year, as bad as Obama. That's what we ran against. So I think it's a great deal of hypocrisy going on right now with the Republican leadership allowing and actually supporting budgets that we railed against when they were President Obama's.
Which is why I want to talk to you about your penny plan. But before I get there, are you in favor of this rescission plan to actually rescind some of the spending?
Absolutely. I haven't seen exactly what's in it, so we need to know what's in it before we decide how to vote on it. But actually clawing back and spending less money is what I've been pitching for a long time.
So what about your penny plan to balance the federal budget? Tell us about it.
The penny plan, I think, is easier to get broad bipartisan support for because it doesn't cut all of one program. It cuts 1% of every program. And frankly, I think there's enough waste, even in the military, to cut 1% of it and make government more efficient. The only way you'll ever get rid of waste in government is to give them less funds. If you say, oh, we've got waste and we're going to cut waste next year, but we're going to give you $100 billion more in the Pentagon, there won't be any waste cut. If we give you 1% less, there'll be waste cut. But if you cut 1% a year, the penny plan for 5 years, the budget actually balances. I've introduced that now, and we will force a vote on the Senate. In the next week or two, we will get a vote on my budget. And I also have reconciliation instructions to allow a simple majority in the Senate to vote to expand health savings accounts to every American.
Well, is spending on the wall in your budget? Because it's pretty extraordinary that we're talking about a $47 trillion budget here, and there wasn't even the $25 billion that the president wanted for his wall.
I think we have to have border security, and it is part of our national security to have border security. I think we can debate on how much it should cost. Some of the estimates of $20 million a mile, I think, are outlandish. And I think we could also use technology. I've met some young inventors who've talked about using sonar and cameras and other things that really wouldn't be a wall for 2,000 miles. So I think you can use walls in some of the urban areas, but I think really we ought to use technology. It's much less expensive in many of the other areas.
Senator, did you discuss this with the president yesterday?
We didn't talk about the wall so much. We really talked about his vision of the world and war, his concern for the veterans. He talked about his trips to Walter Reed and talked about, meeting the veterans and being affected the same way all of us are as we see these young men who have sacrificed so much. And that's why I say not one soldier more. I mean, if there's no military mission, there's no military mission left really in Syria, for goodness sakes, it's going to be a political solution. Same with Yemen, same with Afghanistan. So if these are going to be political solutions, let's quit sending our soldiers there.
Well, what about what Lindsey Graham says? And that is, look, you may be tired of fighting with the extremists, but guess what? They're not tired of fighting with you.
He's been wrong about every foreign policy sort of pronouncement over the last 40 years. He's a neoconservative who really doesn't have concern for the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, but really wants to be at war everywhere. And I think the wars are bankrupting us. And I think sometimes you create more terrorists than you kill. If you want to go to every remote village in Africa and kill a chieftain over there and say, oh, we got somebody from Al-Qaeda, well, you create 10 for every you kill. So I think he's been wrong about most things like this. And I think people would be wise to think through what he's been saying, because it's bankrupting our country and it's a terrible foreign policy.
Well, we know that there are a number of programs going bankrupt, like entitlements, like Social Security, like Medicare, like Medicaid. Now we're getting new details about a phase 2 tax cut plan. I spoke with House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady earlier this morning. Here's what he said. Listen to this, Senator.
This year, we're looking at issues like, can we help families save more and earlier throughout their lifetime? Can we spur more innovation here in the United States? And can we make permanent some of the long-term but not yet permanent provisions of the tax code?
He's talking about making things permanent, like the individual tax cuts, like the expensing. Would you support a phase 2 tax cut plan, sir?
Absolutely. And I think this is something, many of the Democrats were complaining and saying, oh, the tax cuts are not going to be permanent, so it's not really going to help individuals. Well, I think we'd like to make it permanent. And if the Democrats would join with us, I think we could make the individual tax side permanent. And really, the individual side is where we really helped a lot of the working class out with this recent tax cut. So making that permanent would be a huge step forward. And hopefully the Democrats who criticized us over that will join us to make it permanent.
We'll see where that leads. And real quick, finally, Iran's president, Senator, is warning that the U.S. is going to see grave consequences if Washington withdraws from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. This coming as the French President Emmanuel Macron is set to hold talks with the president today over that nuclear deal and threats from North Korea and Syria. Macron wants to urge the president to not withdraw from the controversial agreement. Your expectation, sir?
I think the most important thing is Iran adhering to the agreement? And so far, all indications have been that they adhered to it. I don't think it was the best agreement in the world, and I think we could have done better. But we have the agreement. It is a multilateral agreement in the sense that many other countries joined with us in the agreement. So I think it would be a mistake to exit hastily from it, particularly if Iran is adhering to it. Now, there's a more complicated arms race going on in the Middle East, and people have to realize that Iran reacts to Saudi Arabia. That is their rival in the region. So when we sell $300 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia, Iran will react and continue to develop their weapons. So people have to realize that it is an action and a reaction, and that it can't be seen just as, oh, here is evil Iran and they're creating weapons. Well, they're doing it in response to Saudi Arabia, back and forth. Who started it? I don't know, but it is an arms race.
Yeah, absolutely. Senator, it's good to see you, sir. Thanks so much.
Thank you.